Settle in with a cup of tea and your imagination. This is Detective Duo, where every clue finds its place, just as Tommy and Tuppence would have insisted. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us where in the world you're joining from. Tuppence Beresford had always believed that rooms behave differently depending on one's mood. This morning, her sitting room seemed far too pleased with itself. The fire crackled with smug little pops, the clock on the mantel ticked with prim self-satisfaction, and even the chairs looked as though they had been arranged by a housemaid, secretly proud of her symmetry. Tuppence, however, was in no state to appreciate domestic harmony. She was attempting the impossible task of putting away yesterday's scattered correspondence while balancing a feather duster under one elbow and a stack of newspapers under the other. She had only just lifted her favourite patterned teacup from the mantel, blue and white porcelain with a garland of tiny violets, when a sharp, decisive tick split the air. She froze. The sound had come from the cup itself. A hairline crack stretched across the glaze like a spider's daring escape. Tuppence stared at it, first in disbelief, then in a prickle of unease. The cup had not been hot nor handled roughly. It had simply cracked, all by itself. Tommy Beresford, seated comfortably in an armchair and pretending to read the financial pages, peered over the rim of the paper. "You look," he remarked, "as though the teacup has insulted your ancestors." "It didn't crack," Tuppence insisted. "It announced something." Tommy sighed. "My dear girl, teacups don't make announcements, not even your sentimental favourites." Tuppence placed the damaged cup carefully onto the table. "Edith Langley used to say cracks appear when truths are about to. You remember Edith?" "I remember Edith insisting that umbrellas could sense treachery," Tommy replied. "She wasn't precisely the guiding star of rational thought." Tuppence ignored that. Something had shifted in the air, just slightly, like the quiet before a curtain is lifted. She moved to the hall table where the Morning Post lay scattered. Bills, circulars, and, her breath caught, a single ivory envelope with a familiar, looping handwriting. Edith's handwriting. "But, Tommy," she held it out, "Edith died 3 weeks ago." His brows lifted. Perhaps it was delayed. "There's delayed," Tuppence said with narrowing eyes, "and there's delayed with theatrical intent. Edith never did anything without a touch of drama." She opened the envelope with a letter opener shaped like a miniature sword, one Tommy insisted was entirely impractical and therefore perfectly suited to her. Inside was a single sheet, no longer than her hand, bearing only a few hurried lines. "Forgive the danger I leave behind. Search the place where secrets were meant to sleep. Hollow Lodge." Tuppence felt the words lodge themselves somewhere beneath her ribs. Hollow Lodge. The Langley family's old country estate closed for years, left to moulder behind tangled hedges and shuttered windows. Edith had always disliked speaking of it. She called it a house that kept its disappointments. Tommy read the letter over her shoulder. "Well," he said lightly, "I admit it's dramatic, but Edith probably wrote it ages ago and forgot to post it." "Edith never forgot to post anything," Tuppence replied. "She once mailed a thank-you note for a courtesy she only imagined someone had done for her. This letter means something." Tommy leaned back in the armchair. "Let's assume Edith intended this to reach us before she died. What precisely are we meant to do? March up to Hollow Lodge and demand to speak to its ghosts?" "The letter doesn't mention ghosts," Tuppence said. "It mentions danger, and secrets, and a place where they were meant to sleep." Tommy folded his newspaper. "You're taking that tone again." "What tone?" "The one that ends with us crawling behind furniture in a house with more draft than floorboards." She gave him a look that had propelled the pair of them into more adventures than Tommy wished to count. "Tommy," she said softly, "Edith would never send nonsense. Not to us." He hesitated. Edith Langley had been an old friend, warm, peculiar, but loyal. She was not the sort to compose melodramatic riddles without reason. Yet her death had been attributed to natural causes. Peaceful, they'd said. Unexpected, but not suspicious. Still, Edith had always been afraid of something, or someone. "You think she was in danger," Tommy murmured. Tuppence nodded. "Or that she believed she was." She moved back toward the mantel, lifting the cracked teacup once more. It felt suddenly symbolic, as though the universe had tapped her on the shoulder. She set the cup down deliberately, the crack catching the light like a warning. Tommy rose from the armchair and crossed to stand beside her. "Let's look at this sensibly," he said. "A mysterious letter arrives after its writer has died. It mentions danger. It mentions Hollow Lodge. What do we actually know about the place?" "Only that Edith hated speaking of it," Tuppence replied. "And that it frightened her, though she'd never admit that directly." "Frightened her," Tommy echoed. "Edith didn't frighten easily." "Precisely." Tuppence returned the letter to its envelope, closing the flap as though not wanting the air to tarnish it further. "I should like to see the lodge again," she said at last, "only to satisfy curiosity, of course." Tommy rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You realize," he said gently, "that your curiosity has tested the structural integrity of several continents." "That's hardly fair. Only 2 continents." "3, Tommy corrected. "You're forgetting the incident with the antique clock and the Bulgarian diplomat." Tuppence waved this away. "Entirely unrelated. This is different. I feel, I don't know, summoned somehow." Tommy laughed, but it sounded uneasy. "Very well, if you insist. But let's not go today, or even tomorrow. We ought to consider whether—" A knock sounded at the door. Not a neighbourly tap or a casual visitor's knock, but a firm, deliberate rap, as though made by someone who wished to ensure the sound carried through the walls. Tuppence exchanged a look with Tommy. "Were you expecting anyone?" "No." Tuppence crossed the sitting room. The knocking did not repeat, but something in its echo made her skin tighten. She opened the door a cautious inch. No one stood outside. The landing was empty, silent. Only the faint echo of footsteps retreating down the stairs hinted that someone had been there moments before, and at her feet, lying on the floorboards, was a single scrap of paper. She picked it up. It was blank, entirely blank, but freshly torn. "Tommy," she whispered, "someone knows we received the letter." He joined her at the door, frowning deeply. Or someone simply enjoys dramatic gestures. "Tommy." "Yes, all right," he conceded. "It's unsettling." They closed the door. Tuppence's mind was already forming connections, half-thoughts, vague impressions, the beginnings of a map drawn in intuition. Edith's letter, the crack in the teacup, the footsteps in the corridor, the blank scrap of paper. Pieces, waiting. She returned to the mantel, lifted the cracked teacup once more, and held it as though weighing her decision in porcelain. "Tommy," she said quietly, "we're going to Hollow Lodge." He exhaled, resigned. "I feared you'd say that." "And something," Tuppence added, her gaze steady, "has already begun, long before we opened that envelope." Tommy glanced toward the hall door as if expecting another knock. "Then," he said, "we should begin as well." Tuppence slipped Edith's letter into her handbag. The teacup remained on the mantel, cracked, silent, and somehow watching. Tommy Beresford steered the little motor car along a narrow country lane, the tyres murmuring against the gravel as though reluctant to announce their presence. He leaned forward slightly, squinting at an unfamiliar milestone half obscured by brambles. "I'm beginning to suspect," he said, "that Hollow Lodge relocated itself during the war." Tuppence, seated beside him with Edith's envelope resting on her lap like a talisman, did not smile. Her eyes traced the hedgerows they passed, overgrown, unkempt, and weaving a shadowed lattice across the road. "Edith never trusted this place," she murmured. "She said it was a house built for size and disappointments." Tommy risked a glance at her. "You're unusually poetic this morning." "It isn't poetry," Tuppence replied. "It's memory." They drove on. The countryside was peaceful, but not in the comforting sense. It felt too still, as though pausing to listen. Tuppence found her fingers tightening around the letter, though she pretended otherwise. Edith Langley's looping script stared back up at her, gentle and urgent all at once. "Forgive the danger I leave behind. Search the place where secrets were meant to sleep. Hollow Lodge." She folded the letter again with care. "It troubles you," Tommy observed. "Everything about it troubles me," she replied simply. They rounded a bend, and Hollow Lodge appeared, abruptly, massively, at the end of a long, uneven drive. Once elegant, now tired, the estate rose from a tangle of ivy and heavy trees. Tall windows watched their approach like narrowed eyes. Tommy exhaled. "Well, it's certainly the sort of place where secrets might sleep. or sulk. They pulled up before the broad stone steps. The front door, dark wood doubled with iron studs, opened before they could knock. A thin man stepped out, shoulders drawn tight beneath a caretaker's coat that had once been crisp but now sagged at the seams. "Mr. Reeves, I presume?" Tuppence asked. The caretaker blinked rapidly, like someone adjusting to a sudden glare. "Yes, madam. Can I assist you?" "Tuppence and Tommy Beresford," she said. "We were close friends of the late Mrs. Edith Langley. We received a letter that suggested we should visit." Reeves's expression tightened. "Letter? I had no instructions regarding visitors." He spoke politely, but his gaze kept flicking toward the long windows of the lodge, as though expecting someone or something to emerge behind them. Tommy cleared his throat. "We should like to pay our respects to the house, and to Edith's memory." Reeves hesitated, then stepped aside. "Very well, but the place is in disarray. I've been doing what I can, though." His voice trailed off, replaced by uneasy silence. They entered the wide front hall. Dust lingered in the corners, and many of the furnishings were draped in white sheets, ghostly and stiff. Yet there was also a faint, unmistakable smell of furniture polish. Fresh, not old. Someone had cleaned recently, but only in selective patches. A polished banister, a gleaming desk corner, a recently wiped mantel. Tuppence's brows drew together. "You've been busy," Reeves swallowed. "Certain areas required attention." "Only certain areas?" Tommy asked lightly. Reeves did not answer. They followed him into the drawing room. Light filtered dimly through tall windows, revealing a room caught between neglect and preservation. A writing desk stood near the fireplace, its surface bare save for a thin layer of dust. The lock glinted faintly. Tuppence moved closer. "Is this Edith's?" Reeves shifted uneasily. "Yes, but it's been locked for years. No key remains." Tuppence pressed a finger against the keyhole. "Oh, hasn't it now?" The caretaker's throat tightened. "Madam, if you force it, I'm not forcing anything. I'm merely becoming acquainted." But her voice had the alert edge Tommy recognized too well. Tuppence Beresford had found something worth unraveling. As she examined the desk, Tommy wandered to the fireplace. The grate held the remains of a fire, not recent, but not old enough to be from Edith's time. Among the ashes rested a curled, half-burned sheet. He reached for it with the poker. "Careful," Tuppence warned. "I always am," said Tommy, which was patently untrue. The paper flaked at the edges but remained intact enough to show a few words written in Edith's delicate script. "Not safe. Someone knows." He looked up sharply. Tuppence was already scanning the room again. "Something was written here," she said, running her fingertips across the desk's surface. The dust showed faint indentations, barely visible but present. Someone had written something on this very desk before tearing it away. "And the blotter?" she asked. Reeves blinked. "Blotter?" "Most writing desks have one," Tuppence said. "This one is conspicuously missing." Tommy joined her. "Reeves, when did you last see the blotter?" I don't recall." Tuppence gave him a long look. "Of course you don't." Before Reeves could respond, footsteps echoed sharply in the hallway. They approached quickly, confidently. A moment later, a young woman swept into the room, her tailored coat swinging behind her like a banner of annoyance. Her features were delicate but drawn tight, and her dark hair was pinned in an elegant but hurried fashion. "Tuppence Beresford," she demanded. "I was told strangers were wandering the estate." "I'd hardly call us strangers," Tuppence replied. "Clara Langley, I presume." Clara's expression wavered, just for a heartbeat. "I didn't expect anyone visiting. The estate is closed." "We received a letter from your aunt," Tuppence said. Clara stiffened as though struck. "A letter? Recently?" 3 weeks after her death, Tommy supplied. Clara's gaze flicked toward the writing desk. Quick, nervous, involuntary. The reaction lasted no more than a second, but Tuppence saw it. "We were fond of Edith," Tuppence said gently. "We merely wished to understand why she wanted us here." Clara's hands tightened around the edges of her coat. "My aunt became eccentric in her final months. Imaginative. Things she wrote shouldn't be taken seriously." "Eccentric," Tuppence echoed. "Is that the word you'd choose?" Clara hesitated. She was troubled. There were family matters she dwelled on excessively. "Such as Hollow Lodge?" Tommy asked. "Such as many things," Clara snapped. Then, softening only slightly, she added, "This house is full of old shadows, Mrs. Beresford. They don't concern outsiders." Tuppence smiled sweetly. "Oh, my dear, you'd be surprised." Clara exhaled sharply, clearly wishing they would leave. But before she could dismiss them, Tommy lifted the half-burned scrap of paper. "Would you know anything about this?" he asked. Clara froze. Her eyes widened just enough to betray a flicker of fear before she composed herself. "I have no idea what that is." "Of course you don't," Tuppence murmured thoughtfully. Clara turned away. "I must attend to other matters. If you intend to stay, do not touch anything without permission." She swept from the room, her footsteps quick and uneven. Reeves exhaled shakily. "She has been under great strain. The family is complicated." "That," Tuppence said, "is the understatement of the decade." Her gaze returned to the writing desk. Something had been written here, something important, something someone wanted gone. "We'll return tomorrow," she said lightly. Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Tomorrow?" "Oh yes," Tuppence replied, her eyes gleaming. "That desk has secrets, and I fully intend to open it." Tommy Beresford had always believed that Tuppence possessed three distinct smiles: her social smile, her triumphant smile, and, most dangerous of all, her "I am about to do something you shouldn't watch too closely" smile. She displayed the third one now, as she slid a delicate silver hairpin from her coiffure and twirled it between her fingers with the satisfaction of an artist returning to her favourite medium. "Tommy," she murmured, not looking up, "be an angel and occupy Mr. Reeves, preferably in another room." Tommy cleared his throat and stepped squarely in front of the caretaker, who hovered anxiously near the drawing-room doorway. "Reeves, old chap," he began brightly, "did Edith ever mention her plans for the local orphanage fund? I recall something about a sizable bequest, or was that a rumour? Oh, and while we're on the subject, did she ever speak of her secret philanthropies?" Reeves blinked rapidly. "Secret? What? No, sir. Mrs. Langley wasn't the, secretive type." "Oh, I quite disagree," Tommy said solemnly, taking Reeves gently by the elbow and steering him out toward the hall. "You'd be surprised how many secret benevolences a lady of Edith's means might undertake. One never knows. Let's step into the corridor. I'd love to hear what you thought of her charitable side." Reeves, bewildered but polite, allowed himself to be guided away. As soon as their footsteps faded, Tuppence crouched before the locked writing desk with the devotion of a locksmith's apprentice and the enthusiasm of a child with a forbidden toy. "Now then," she murmured, "let's see whether you truly lost your key, Edith." She inserted the hairpin, listening to the click and tension of the tumblers. The lock was old and stubborn, but Tuppence had once opened a jewellery case in the dark of an Egyptian tomb, or so she liked to tell people, although Tommy maintained it had merely been a dusty back room in Sussex. Still, the principle remained: confidence, patience, and the correct application of gentle persuasion. A soft metallic snick rewarded her efforts. The desk popped open. For a moment she simply gazed at it, half expecting a cascade of letters, photographs, or incriminating bundles to come tumbling out. Instead, she found almost nothing. The interior was oddly bare, stripped of personality. Tuppence frowned deeply. "Edith, Edith," she whispered, "what were you doing?" She probed the compartments with careful fingers. One cubby contained only dust and a faint rectangular imprint where something thin had once rested. But at the back corner, Tuppence's sharp eyes caught it, a slight irregularity in the wood. She tapped it lightly. "Ha!" she breathed. "A false back." With a swift tug, the panel slid free, revealing a small fabric pouch, worn soft by years of handling. Her pulse quickened. She loosened the drawstring and peered inside. Out tumbled three objects: a broken fountain pen, the nib snapped cleanly in two, a torn map of the estate grounds, brittle at the edges, and a half-sheet of cream notepaper addressed simply to E. Tuppence unfolded the fragment with utmost care. "You cannot keep it hidden forever. Someone already knows. Burn this, for your own sake. No signature, no date." But the tone, accusatory, urgent, made her throat tighten. The rest of the letter was missing. She studied the dust traces inside the desk. A thin, rectangular shape had been removed recently, very recently. Someone had taken the top half of the letter, but left the bottom, perhaps in haste or ignorance of what it contained. "Tommy," she murmured, "we may have found our first real clue." "Found what?" The voice came sharply from the doorway. Clara Langley stood there, eyes wide and blazing, her coat unbuttoned as though she'd rushed back inside. She looked from Tuppence to the open desk, her breath quickened. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Tuppence stood calmly, the fabric pouch held at her side. "Merely observing. This desk seemed rather determined to share something with us." "You had no right," Clara snapped, stepping further into the room. Her gaze darted to the broken fountain pen, then to the torn letter. "There is nothing of value in there. Nothing at all." "Odd that you should say so with such alarm," Tuppence replied softly. Clara's composure faltered. I simply mean my aunt kept trivial things, sentimental scraps. Nothing important." "And yet," Tommy said, reappearing behind her with perfect timing, "you seem terribly distressed. Would you mind explaining why?" Clara ignored him, brushing past to the desk, but Tommy had already pocketed the fragment. Her eyes swept the interior anyway, then closed briefly as though in frustration. "You should leave," she managed. "All of you. This house doesn't need outsiders stirring up old rubbish." "Clara," Tuppence said gently, "did you know Edith received threats?" Clara's face drained of colour. "Threats? No, of course not. She was ill, tired. She imagined things." Tommy lifted an eyebrow. "And did her imagination also break her own pen in half?" Clara's eyes dropped, too quickly, and Tuppence noticed something else, a faint streak of dark blue ink along Clara's left sleeve cuff, the very same shade as the ink that still clung to the broken pen's nib. Before Tuppence could pursue this, Reeves shuffled in behind Tommy. His face looked paler than before, strained. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low and urgent, "but I must speak with you, privately." Clara whirled on him. "Reeves, why are you allowing them to pry into my aunt's things?" Reeves lowered his gaze. "Miss Clara, I don't control what visitors do, and your aunt did give certain implications before her death." Clara stiffened. "Implications?" But Reeves fell silent, suddenly remembering Clara's presence. "Never mind," Tuppence said smoothly. "We're leaving for now. We've seen quite enough for today." Clara watched them go with tight, guarded hostility. Once they stepped into the hall, Reeves leaned close to Tommy. "Be careful," he whispered. "People have entered this house at night. I hear them." Tommy frowned. "Who?" "I don't know," Reeves replied, trembling slightly. "But footsteps move where no one should be. Doors open. Someone is searching for something." "What are they looking for?" Tuppence asked. Reeves shook his head. "Whatever it is, Mrs. Langley hid it well." He refused to elaborate further. Outside, the estate seemed to have grown larger, deeper, as though the house itself had inhaled. Tuppence felt watched, subtly, silently. She scanned the grounds. The earth near the orchard caught her attention, footprints leading toward a small shed and back again. Tommy followed her gaze. "Someone's been very busy," he murmured. Tuppence's instincts sharpened to a point. "We'll return tomorrow." That desk wasn't the only thing hiding something, and they left the estate with the uneasy sense of eyes following them, the tall windows of Hollow Lodge gleaming like watchful, unblinking lids. Back at their hotel, the manager approached them the moment they stepped inside. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford?" he asked, adjusting his spectacles nervously. "A message was left for you. No name." He held out a narrow envelope. Tuppence opened it. There was only one line inside, written in a heavy, deliberate hand. "Go home. Edith's secrets died with her." She folded the note without expression. "Tommy," she said softly, "now we know for certain. Someone is very much alive, and very much afraid we'll learn the truth." The spoon trembled ever so slightly as Clara Langley stirred her tea. It was the first thing Tuppence noticed when they sat down in Clara's narrow, over-decorated sitting room, a room that had once aimed for refinement, but now carried the faint scent of financial strain. Delicate china, slightly chipped, floral drapes, sun-faded, a carpet that had seen too many careful rearrangements to hide wear, but the tremor of Clara's spoon revealed more than any furnishing could. "You must understand," Clara said, lifting her chin with brittle poise. My aunt's last months were unsettled. She grew suspicious of everyone, even me. It was quite exhausting being accused of, well, nothing at all. Tuppence exchanged a small glance with Tommy. Suspicious in what way? She asked mildly. Oh, letters, wills, mysterious callers, Clara said with an airy shrug. She imagined secrets where none existed. It was grief, perhaps, or age. Yet her eyes shifted away from them, refusing to linger too long. And yet, Tuppence said, you reacted very strongly when we mentioned the letter she sent us. Clara's spoon clattered softly against the rim of her cup. Anyone would, if strangers arrived waving cryptic notes and rummaging through family belongings. Of course, Tommy agreed pleasantly. Perfectly natural. Clara looked relieved at his civility and leaned back. I only want things to remain peaceful now. Edith was complicated, but she deserves rest. Rest, Tuppence echoed thoughtfully. And secrets? Clara stiffened. I've told you there were no secrets, not worth chasing at any rate. But the tremor in her hand returned. Next on Tuppence's list was Leonard Langley. If Clara's house resembled faded gentility, Leonard's quarters above a village shop seemed the refuge of a man who preferred solitude to comfort. He opened the door a mere inch before allowing them inside. Tuppence and Tommy Beresford, he muttered, as though reading their names from a forgotten ledger. Clara telephoned, said you were prying. We're asking questions, Tommy corrected gently. Polite ones. Leonard's grey eyes flickered with impatience. You want to know about Edith? Yes, Tuppence said. We want to understand her final weeks. Leonard strode to a cluttered writing desk and pushed aside a stack of unpaid bills. My sister was perfectly lucid, he declared. Not mad, not frail, not fanciful. She was sharper than half the village combined. But she had burdens, personal matters. What kind of personal matters? Tuppence asked softly. Leonard ran a hand through thinning hair. Things she did not care to share. Edith preferred handling problems alone. She distrusted interference even from family. Tuppence studied him. And yet Clara believes she grew paranoid. Clara knows nothing, Leonard snapped. She only visited when she needed money. Did Edith mention Hollow Lodge to you? Tuppence asked. Leonard froze. His eyes hardened, his jaw tightened. Hollow Lodge, he repeated slowly, is a place better forgotten. Why? Tommy asked. Leonard turned away, gazing at the bookshelves as though seeking refuge in their dusty spines. Because that house ruins people, he whispered. It was such a stark, unguarded confession that neither Tommy nor Tuppence spoke for a moment. When they tried to ask more, Leonard abruptly announced the visit was over. He ushered them to the door with an abruptness that bordered on desperation. As they stepped back into the street, Tuppence murmured, He fears the lodge more than Clara does. And more honestly, Tommy said. Their third interview took them to a neat cottage surrounded by an overflow of potted plants. The door opened to reveal Marian Elwood, a distant cousin with a soft smile and perceptive eyes. She had spent a year living with Edith as a companion, and unlike the others, she invited them inside without suspicion. Edith always spoke fondly of you both, Marian said as she offered them tea. She admired your, how did she put it, inclination toward finding the inconvenient truth. Tuppence smiled. We're flattered. Marian settled into an armchair. Ask whatever you need. Were her final months troubled? Tuppence asked gently. Marian hesitated. She was occupied, not distressed exactly, but consumed by a need to set something right. Something from her past? Tommy asked. Marian nodded. I believe so, but she never confided the details. She said, if I burden you with this, you'll be in danger too. So I didn't press. That sounds decidedly unparanoid, Tuppence said. Marian laughed softly. Edith was not mad, she was frightened, and she meant to act. One night she said the strangest thing. If I die unexpectedly, it will not be my heart that fails me. Tuppence's fingers tightened around her teacup. She actually said that? Yes. I dismissed it as melodrama at the time, but now... Marian's calm expression faltered. Perhaps I should not have. Tommy leaned forward. Did Edith ever mention a letter? A final letter, intended for someone? Marian shook her head. No, but she did hide papers. She thought I didn't notice, but I did. Little scraps tucked into absurd places, the hems of curtains, books she never read. as though she expected someone might search her room. "Did she?" Tuppence asked quietly. "Expect someone to search?" Marion looked down at her hands. Yes, and she believed that person knew her too well. After parting from Marion, Tommy left Tuppence at the hotel with the promise of returning shortly. "I'll pop by the solicitor," he said. "He handled Edith's will. If anyone knows what she was arranging, it's him." Tuppence watched him disappear up the street, her mind churning with contradictions. Edith paranoid, Edith lucid, Edith secretive, Edith confiding. Every relative had described a different woman entirely, and yet each account contained a sliver of truth. Hours later, Tommy returned, the faint gleam of a discovered clue reflected in his eyes. "You were right," he said, as soon as they settled into a quiet tea room. "The solicitor had something." Tuppence leaned in. "What sort of something?" "Edith amended her will a week before she died," Tommy said. "A minor change, except for one peculiar instruction. She left a sealed envelope to be delivered only to the rightful finder of the truth at Hollow Lodge." Tuppence inhaled sharply. "And where is this envelope now?" "Gone," Tommy said grimly. "Vanished the morning after her death. No sign of forced entry, no explanation. The solicitor assumed Edith changed her mind and destroyed it. But I rather think someone else destroyed it, or took it." Tuppence tapped one finger against the tablecloth, deep in thought. "The torn half-letter in the desk," she murmured. "The missing top half. The burn marks in the grate. Edith hiding scraps everywhere." "And 3 relatives," Tommy added, "each frightened of something different. Clara afraid of financial scandal, Leonard afraid of the lodge itself, and Marion afraid she ignored a warning." Tuppence nodded slowly. "They're all telling shadows of the same truth. Something happened in that house, something Edith tried to reveal, and someone else tried to erase." Tommy leaned closer. "Tuppence, do you feel it?" "Feel what?" "That we're not chasing one secret," he whispered. "We're chasing fragments of several, all overlapping, and whatever lies at the center is something Edith believed could kill her." Tuppence looked down at her tea. The liquid trembled slightly in the cup, not from nerves, but from the vibration of footsteps passing their table. A waiter moved away, oblivious. "Tommy," she said quietly, "Hollow Lodge isn't just a house with a past. It's a house with an unfinished story, and it's time we found the page everyone else keeps trying to tear out." They sat together in the warm hush of the tea room, piecing together the scattered testimonies like torn edges of a letter waiting to be made whole. Tuppence Beresford did not trust dusk, not because it concealed danger — darkness had never particularly concerned her — but because it encouraged people to behave in ways they would never dare in daylight. Secrets grew bolder at dusk, footsteps softened, courage sharpened, and tonight, as she and Tommy stepped through the back gate of Hollow Lodge's estate, she felt that peculiar tightening in the air that suggested they were walking directly into someone else's mischief. "I still maintain," Tommy murmured as they followed the narrow garden path, "that Reeves looked positively relieved when we said we'd explore alone." "Relieved," Tuppence agreed, "and terrified. An interesting combination." She carried a small torch, careful to aim its beam low so it wouldn't spill across the open lawns. Tommy kept glancing toward the house behind them, a brooding silhouette with too many windows that seemed to watch their progress. It was just after dusk, though the last fringe of daylight still clung faintly to the horizon. When they reached the orchard, the world felt different, quiet in a deeper way than the house grounds, as though even insects had decided not to trespass here. Rows of gnarled apple trees formed long, crooked tunnels of twisting branches. The old shed sat at the end, its timbers bowed, its roof slightly uneven. Reeves had met them at the back entrance earlier, wringing his hands like a man grasping secrets he wished desperately to let go. "You may go," he'd said, "but I won't accompany you, not after dark." Tuppence had asked why. Reeves had only shaken his head and muttered, "Some things walk here that shouldn't." Now, standing before the shed, she understood that he hadn't been speaking metaphorically. Tommy nudged the warped door open, and they stepped inside. The air held a faint smell of old earth and candle smoke. Tools hung neatly on one wall, at least someone had once tried for order, while the rest of the shed appeared in disarray. A wooden crate lay overturned, scattering soil across the floor. The remnants of candle stubs, freshly melted and hardened again, dotted the ground near a makeshift stool. Someone had been here recently, very recently. Tuppence crouched beside the crates. "Look," she whispered, holding up a stub. Tommy joined her. "Still warm." "And here," she murmured, pulling a thick sliver from beneath a wooden box. "Parchment." She smoothed it carefully beneath the torchlight. The scrap was thicker than ordinary paper, with a faint crest pressed into its surface, the outline of a shield with curling motifs. "This isn't from Edith's time," Tuppence said slowly. "It's much older. Decades older. Maybe longer." Tommy whistled softly. "So whatever our mysterious visitor is searching for, it's not just modern secrets." "No," Tuppence agreed. "It's something buried in the family's deeper history." She scanned the shed once more. The earth had been disturbed beneath the stool, and faint boot scuffs suggested someone had paced nervously, searching, reaching, kneeling. A soft sound interrupted her thoughts. A crunch, very slight. From outside. Tommy stiffened. Someone's coming. Without speaking, Tuppence switched off the torch. Darkness fell instantly, thick and absolute. They moved silently behind a row of tools hanging from the wall, rakes, spades, shears, forming a narrow alcove. Footsteps approached, measured, cautious. The shed door creaked open wider, letting in a dull slice of twilight. A figure entered, cloaked, hooded, the clothing long enough to obscure form and face. Only the hands were visible, fine, slender hands, uncalloused. A voice, low, tense, unmistakably educated, whispered into the gloom. Where did she hide it? It must be here. Tuppence felt Tommy shift slightly at her side. She pressed a steadying hand against his arm. The figure moved about the shed with growing frustration, knocking aside boxes, muttering beneath their breath. So close. She must have left it. The voice trembled, not with fear but anger. After several agonizing moments, the figure froze as though sensing the weight of another's presence. Tuppence held her breath, but the intruder lifted their hood slightly, sighed sharply, and slipped back out into the orchard. The door fell shut behind them. Tommy waited 3 long counts. "Well," he whispered, "I'd say that narrows it down." "Leonard or Marion," Tuppence agreed softly. "Both educated, both secretive, both with reasons to search." Tommy nodded. "Clara too?" "No," Tuppence said decisively. "Clara's agitation is emotional, not intellectual." That voice was calculating, determined. She relit the torch and swept its beam slowly across the floor. Something tugged at her instincts. A patch of soil near the shed's back wall, scraped unevenly as though someone had dug hastily. Tuppence knelt, brushing aside loose earth. "Fetch me that gardening fork." Tommy retrieved it, and together they dug gently into the disturbed patch. The soil gave way with little resistance, and soon a rusted edge appeared, metal, thin, box-like. "A box," Tommy murmured. "Clearly hidden," Tuppence replied, "and clearly found by our night visitor earlier. But abandoned?" Tommy helped her lift it out. The metal box was old, very old, its hinges corroded, its surface mottled. Tuppence pried it open with delicate care. Inside lay only a single scrap of paper. She lifted it, a small rectangle, discoloured with age. On it, handwritten in elegant but fading ink, were the words, "The first is not the last. Look where the house breathes." Tuppence straightened slowly. "Another riddle." Tommy frowned. "Meaning what?" "It means," Tuppence said, "that Edith was not hiding merely one secret. She was hiding several, and this clue suggests the next one lies somewhere within the house itself, somewhere alive with airflow." Tommy considered. "A chimney, perhaps, or a ventilation shaft." "Precisely." She slid the scrap into her pocket. "And someone else is already on this trail." "I wonder," Tommy murmured, "whether our night visitor found this box empty and assumed Edith moved its contents." "Likely." Tuppence glanced around the shed again. "But they'll be back. Whoever they are, they won't stop with one search." The orchard suddenly shuddered with a distant shout. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford!" Reeves's voice carried through the trees, sharp with panic. "Come quickly!" Tommy stiffened. "Reeves?" Tuppence extinguished the torch again, letting her eyes adjust before they stepped into the orchard path. Reeves appeared at a run, his coat flapping behind him, his face chalk white. "What is it?" Tuppence demanded. "The house," Reeves gasped. "The lights, they've gone out. All of them. Someone cut the power." Tommy exchanged a grim look with Tuppence. "Cut it," he repeated. "Not an outage?" "No outage," Reeves insisted. "I heard the switch, heard it snap. Someone's inside and they've plunged Hollow Lodge into darkness." Tuppence felt the orchard wind shift around them, as though the estate itself inhaled. "Well," she said quietly, "that confirms it. Someone doesn't want us seeing what comes next." Reeves twisted his hands together. "We should return to the house at once." Tommy nodded. "Lead the way." But Tuppence paused, glancing back toward the shed. "Tommy," she murmured, "this wasn't random. Tonight's visitor came searching before the lights were cut. Someone is orchestrating movements around this estate, watching, waiting, manipulating." Tommy took her arm gently. "Let's discuss orchestration when we're not standing in an orchard where someone might be lurking." Together they followed Reeves toward the lodge. Darkness stretched like a shroud across the grounds, the last traces of evening fading into the growing void. As they neared the house, the windows stared back at them, black, silent, utterly unlit. Tuppence felt the familiar stir of possibility. "The house breathes," she whispered to herself, repeating the riddle. And tonight, Hollow Lodge had inhaled deeply, drawing them closer to its hidden heart. It was Tuppence who broke the silence first the next morning, not with a theory, but with a question spoken so abruptly over breakfast that Tommy nearly dropped his toast. "Tommy," she said, tapping Edith's riddle with the handle of her spoon, "where does a house breathe?" Tommy blinked. "Do you mean metaphorically? Because if so, I'd say kitchens and gossip are a building's primary respiratory functions." "No." She pushed aside her teacup, eyes sharp with the glint of deduction. "Literally, last night's clue, look where the house breathes. It must refer to ventilation or airflow. Hollow Lodge is drafty but not well ventilated. Except—" she paused. "Except?" Tommy prompted. "Except for that odd shaft behind the upstairs landing," Tuppence finished. "The one we passed on the way to Edith's room, remember? A stone panel with a lattice pattern. It struck me as peculiar at the time." Tommy leaned forward. "It looked like an old ventilation chute." "Exactly. The only place in that entire house designed to move air efficiently." She folded the note. "We're going back." Hollow Lodge appeared less threatening in the morning, though not friendlier. The structure's grand lines remained stiff, as though the house were bracing itself. Reeves met them at the door with his usual mixture of politeness and dread. Clara was nowhere in sight. "We'll only be upstairs," Tuppence assured him, already moving toward the staircase. Reeves hesitated. "I'm not certain Miss Clara will approve." "Then let's hope she's elsewhere," Tommy murmured cheerfully, following Tuppence up the stairs. The upstairs landing felt different in daylight, quieter, but not peaceful. The air carried a faint mineral smell, like cool stone in a cellar. Tuppence stopped at the panel she remembered, a tall, elegant slab carved with overlapping arches, decorative rather than functional. Or so it appeared. She pressed her hand against it. "Hollow," she whispered. Tommy knelt beside her, examining the edges. "There's a gap here, barely noticeable." He ran his fingertip along a thin groove. Tuppence slipped her hairpin from her coiffure, a now familiar gesture, and inserted it into the seam. The panel shifted with surprising ease, pivoting open like a narrow door. Behind it stretched a stone shaft, just wide enough for a slim object to travel. Its interior was dark, but not empty. Faint scratch marks lined the walls. Tommy gave a low whistle. "So Edith hid things vertically." "Or someone else retrieved them that way," Tuppence murmured. She knelt and peered inside. Far above, the shaft disappeared toward the attic. Far below, it reached a decorative grate inset near the drawing-room fireplace. The architecture made sudden sense. If Edith wanted to hide something, Tuppence said softly, she could drop it in from the attic and retrieve it downstairs, or vice versa. Clever. Very clever. Tommy pulled a small pocket torch from his coat. "Shall we?" She nodded. He tied the torch to a length of twine, another impulse born of experience, and lowered it slowly into the shaft. For several feet, nothing happened. Then, clink. "Hit something," Tommy murmured. Metallic. Lower it further, Tuppence urged. He manoeuvred the twine until the torch wedged against an obstruction. A metallic glint reflected faintly. Tommy withdrew the torch and reached into the narrow opening, fingers straining. "Got it," he said at last, pulling out a tiny cylindrical container, old, tarnished, and tightly sealed. Tuppence took it gently. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but recognition. "Edith used to keep documents in little tubes like this," she whispered. "She said they kept things safe from hands and humidity." She twisted the cap open with care. Inside was a curled fragment of paper, the missing half of the torn letter. She unrolled it carefully, smoothing its brittle edges. "Edith, he suspects you. The truth about Hollow Lodge must come out or more harm will follow. Hide the evidence, but do not trust those closest. Burn all copies or they will use it against you." Tuppence exhaled slowly. So Edith really was threatened. "And by someone close to her," Tommy added. "Suggest family, or Reeves." "Or Marion," Tuppence murmured. They exchanged a sober look. "This wasn't eccentricity," Tuppence said. "Edith meant to expose something, and someone feared she would." Before Tommy could reply, a voice behind them snapped, "What do you think you're doing?" They turned. Clara Langley stood at the end of the corridor, eyes blazing, fists clenched. Fury radiated off her like heat. "That," she said, struggling to control her voice, "is private family property." Tommy stepped deliberately in front of Tuppence. "We're investigating a threat made to your aunt, one she clearly believed." Clara's expression contorted. Edith was unwell. She imagined enemies. She hoarded scraps of paper as though they mattered. Her voice wavered at the end, betraying something deeper, fear. Tuppence held up the container. "Then what is this? Why hide letters in a ventilation shaft? Why tear them and burn them? And why did you look terrified when we opened the desk?" Clara's anger faltered. Panic flashed across her face. "You don't understand. You'll make things worse." "For whom?" Tuppence asked gently. Clara swallowed. "For all of us," she whispered, but she offered nothing more. Instead, she turned abruptly and strode down the staircase, her footsteps echoing with agitation. Tommy exhaled slowly. "She's hiding something, but not what we think." "No," Tuppence agreed softly. "Clara's fear isn't guilt, it's dread, as though she knows what the truth is and wishes desperately that we wouldn't find it." She turned back toward the shaft. "There's something else," she said quietly. Tommy glanced inside. "Something else where?" "In the shaft, lower, near the bend." She pointed toward the part where the stone narrowed toward the decorative grate. "Something's lodged too deeply for the twine to reach." Tommy squinted. "I see nothing." "Because it's wedged. Maybe another tube, maybe something larger." Tuppence straightened slowly. "We need access from above." Tommy sighed in resignation. "The attic." Tuppence nodded. "Which likely means more secrets Edith never meant to expose so easily." "Or," Tommy said thoughtfully, "more secrets someone else desperately tried to hide." Tuppence returned the panel to its place, sealing the shaft once again. As it clicked shut, she felt a faint tremor beneath her fingertips, as though the house itself exhaled. She stepped back. "Tommy," she murmured, "this house was designed to conceal. Ventilation shafts, hidden panels, forgotten rooms. Edith may have used them, but someone before her mastered them." "An older generation," Tommy said. "Perhaps the same one behind that parchment in the shed." Tuppence nodded slowly. "A secret old enough to terrify Edith, and to frighten her relatives into contradictions." They descended the stairs quietly. Reeves stood in the entrance hall, pale and restless. "Miss Clara seems upset," he said nervously. Tuppence gave him a thin, unreadable smile. "Clara will have to endure many more upsets before this is done." Reeves flinched. Are you going into the attic?" "In due course," she replied. Reeves's eyes darted briefly to the ceiling. "Be careful. The attic holds things forgotten." "Your vocabulary is becoming suspiciously poetic, Reeves," Tommy noted. But Reeves didn't smile. Outside, the sunlight fell across the estate in thin, jagged lines. Tuppence paused on the front step and looked back at the windows. "The house breathes," she whispered. "Meaning?" Tommy asked. "Meaning this place has lungs," she said. "Passages, hidden channels. And if Edith hid one clue in that shaft, She might have hidden something far more damning above. Tommy folded his arms. So, attic tomorrow? Attic next, Tuppence corrected, and secrets we aren't meant to survive discovering. The wind stirred faintly, not dramatic, not ominous, merely present. Yet in that subtle motion Hollow Lodge seemed almost alive, breathing, waiting, and holding, somewhere in its shadows, the next piece of Edith Langley's truth. The attic door protested loudly when Reeves forced it open, its hinges groaning like an old man woken too early. Dust motes drifted out into the corridor in a faint plume, catching the light like tiny fugitives escaping captivity. "Not many go up here," Reeves muttered, holding a lantern whose glow trembled as much as his hands. Miss Edith only on occasion, though she never said why. Tuppence stepped past him, her expression alert and unafraid. "Attics are where families put the things they don't want to remember," she said softly, "which also makes them excellent places for secrets." Tommy, close behind, coughed as he entered. "And mildew," he added, fanning the air. "Plenty of mildew." The attic stretched before them, vast, dim and cluttered. Boxes towered like forgotten centuries. Trunks lay scattered in uneven rows. A collapsed rocking horse, its painted eyes long faded, rested on its side as if exhausted from years of neglect. Faded portraits leaned against beams, sombre Langleys staring out with expressions that seemed to follow movement. The air felt stale, stagnant, thick with memories that resisted disturbance. Reeves lingered near the doorway, clearly unwilling to step deeper. "Take care," he murmured. "The boards don't trust weight in the far corners." Tuppence approached the ventilation shaft's upper opening, a stone aperture built into the floor near the eaves. Tommy knelt and began clearing debris, loose shingles, brittle straw, old ledgers chewed at the edges by time. "There," Tuppence said, pointing. A thin envelope was wedged between two stones, yellowed to the colour of old parchment. Tommy carefully pried it free. The flap had come unsealed through age rather than interference. Inside lay a brittle sheet, the ink faded but still legible. Tuppence read aloud. "I, being of sound mind, state the truth regarding the tragedy of Rose Hales. A Langley heir caused her death, though it was spoken of as misfortune. I bear witness, though I cannot sign my name. Danger remains so long as breath remains." She looked up sharply. "Rose Hales, that was the housemaid Leonard mentioned," Tommy nodded grimly, "whose accident Edith never discussed." The testimonial had no signature, yet its tone was unmistakably urgent, written by someone afraid of retaliation, someone who believed the truth had been buried deliberately. "Decades old," Tuppence murmured. "This predates Edith's troubles. Whoever wrote this feared for their life. Edith must have found it." "And kept it hidden," Tommy said, "because revealing it would destroy the Langley name." "Or because someone threatened her to keep it hidden," Tuppence countered. Reeves edged closer, his lantern casting jagged shadows across the floor. "Rose's death was before my time here," he said quickly. "No one speaks of it. Miss Edith never permitted the subject." "And yet she preserved this," Tuppence said, sliding the sheet back into its envelope. "She knew something, or someone." They explored further into the attic. Tuppence inspected trunks filled with moth-eaten clothes, stacks of letters with seals broken long ago, framed landscapes whose colours had nearly surrendered to age. Everything smelled faintly of lavender and rot. A faint sound echoed from deeper within, a soft scrape like leather brushing wood. Tommy froze. "Did you hear that?" Tuppence nodded, eyes narrowing. "Someone else is here." Before Reeves could protest, Tommy moved toward the sound. Tuppence followed, weaving between towering trunks and narrow rafters. The attic seemed to shift as they advanced, beams crowding closer, shadows thickening. A movement, swift, dark, flickered between two crates. Tommy lunged forward. "Stop!" But the figure darted away, nimble and silent. Tuppence glimpsed only the outline. A coat, perhaps a scarf, something that shimmered faintly in the lantern's glow. The intruder slipped behind a tall wardrobe, then disappeared into the maze of beams. Tommy pursued, but the attic's labyrinth conspired against him. Every turn produced only another shadow, another empty corridor of dust and memory. Then something clattered against the floor. Tuppence bent swiftly and picked it up. A gold cufflink, elegant, distinctive, engraved with the letter L. She and Tommy exchanged a loaded look. "Leonard," Tommy murmured. "Or someone who wants us to think Leonard," Tuppence said. "But Leonard is the simplest interpretation." Reeves, who had remained near the entrance, wrung his hands. "Surely not Mr. Leonard. He barely visits, and he would not be climbing about the attic like some criminal." "He wouldn't," Tuppence said calmly, "if he wished to be seen, but tonight's visitor didn't wish to be seen." She turned the cufflink in her fingers. A smear of something dark streaked its underside. Ink or soot? She tucked it into her pocket. "Edith's fountain pen," Tuppence murmured. "The missing blotter, the torn letter. Someone altered her correspondence, and now someone is stalking the attic." Tommy sighed. The pieces are forming a very troubling picture. But before they could consider it further, a smell drifted through the ceiling boards, a faint, sinister scent. Smoke. Reeves sniffed the air, then jolted as though struck. "Do you smell that?" Tuppence's eyes widened. "Someone's burning something downstairs." Reeves dropped his lantern and bolted for the attic door. "Come quickly!" Tommy and Tuppence exchanged alarmed glances before racing after him. The descent down the attic stairs was perilous. The old steps creaked angrily under their pace. Halfway down, the smoke thickened, not from a roaring fire, but from something small, quick, intentional. When they reached the landing, Reeves pointed toward the drawing-room corridor. "There!" They rushed inside. A small fire smouldered in the fireplace, not large enough to endanger the house, but clearly set with purpose. The flames licked at a charred cluster of scraps. Tommy seized the poker and dragged them away from the embers. Tuppence knelt, coughing slightly, and began smoothing the burnt fragments against the hearthstone. Most were too scorched to decipher, but one piece retained enough form to reveal a corner of cream stationery, Edith's preferred type. On it, faint but unmistakable, was a flourish of her handwriting. "Her envelope," Tuppence whispered, "the one mentioned in the will. Someone tried to burn it." Tommy leaned close. "They succeeded. Nearly all of it is gone." Tuppence held up one burnt scrap, her voice shaking with both anger and sorrow. "This was meant to reveal the truth to the rightful finder. Edith prepared something for us, for anyone who uncovered the secrets of Hollow Lodge, and someone has been just one step ahead, determined to erase her voice." Reeves wrung his hands. I didn't set this. I heard footsteps. Someone fled just before I arrived." Tuppence stood, her expression sharpened to a blade. "What we saw in the attic, the cufflink, the testimonial, these events are not random. Edith spent her last weeks shielding a truth so powerful that someone is sabotaging every trace of it." Tommy placed a steadying hand on her arm. "And tonight, they failed to stop us." "Temporarily," Tuppence corrected. She turned toward the staircase again. "But there is still one more place we must go. The attic isn't finished with us." Tommy groaned. "I was afraid you'd say that." Tuppence fixed her gaze on the darkened upper floor. Edith hid something deeper in that shaft, something the intruder couldn't reach, and now that we've found the testimonial, we must uncover the entire truth before someone ensures we never leave this house alive. Reeves swallowed audibly. The smouldering scraps hissed behind them. The house seemed to settle in its old bones, and Tuppence, eyes blazing with resolve, whispered the words Edith had once feared. "Danger remains so long as breath remains." The remnants of Edith's burned envelope still lay on the hearth when Tuppence knelt before it the next morning, her gloved fingers hovering just above the charred paper. The ashes told a story, fragmented, incomplete, but a story nonetheless. "Someone was desperate," she said quietly, "and desperation writes its own signature." Tommy, pacing behind her with restless energy, stopped abruptly. "Then the question becomes, whose handwriting is in that ash?" Tuppence rose smoothly. "Let's list our suspects again, but this time without emotion clouding the facts." Tommy grinned. "Emotion clouding facts? That sounds suspiciously like an accusation." "Only a reminder," she said, "that affection or dislike often makes fools of even the cleverest detectives." She crossed to the writing desk and opened her notebook. "First," she began, "Clara Langley, financially strained, defensive, frightened of old scandals resurfacing." Tommy nodded. "And intensely protective of the family reputation, even if she pretends to scorn it." "Second," Tuppence continued, "Leonard Langley, brooding, volatile, and entirely too fond of evasive statements, Also the proud owner of a missing cufflink. Tommy added, third, Marion Elwood, gentle on the surface but observant, and knowing far more about Edith's emotional life than she admits. And lastly, Tuppence said, Reeves, caretaker of a house full of secrets. He hears everything, sees everything, and says almost nothing. Tommy exhaled. 4 suspects, 4 motives, but only one opportunity for each event. Tuppence's gaze sharpened. Exactly. And now we must consider the timeline. She unfolded the Edith's fragmented correspondence, placing each piece carefully beside the others. The incomplete letter retrieved from the ventilation shaft lay closest to her hand. Edith discovered the old testimonial weeks before her death, she said. She hid pieces of letters, burned some, protected others. That implies she was preparing a revelation, but only for the right person. Tommy tapped the table. And someone else intended to stop her. Tuppence nodded. Whoever removed the upper half of that torn letter must have done so recently, within days of Edith's death, perhaps even after. And that, Tommy said, narrows the suspects considerably. A knock at the door interrupted them, an eager rapping, light but persistent. Tuppence opened it to reveal Marion Elwood, clutching her handbag in both hands as though afraid it might escape her. Mrs. Beresford, Marion breathed, I hoped you might spare a moment. Tuppence softened her expression. Of course, come in. Marion entered, glancing around as though expecting disapproval from the walls. I only came because Clara said you were considering the family, considering motives. I don't want you to misunderstand Edith. Help us understand her, Tuppence said gently. That's all we ask. They settled at the table for tea. Marion sipped hers with methodical care, but her hands shook slightly. Edith was worried, Marion said at last. More than she admitted. She said she had found something unforgivable. Those were her exact words. But she never told me what it was. Did she mention danger? Tommy asked. Marion hesitated. She implied it. She said she had only weeks to decide whether she would speak the truth. And the truth concerned Hollow Lodge? Tuppence asked. Marion winced. Everything concerns Hollow Lodge, Mrs. Beresford. The Langleys carry their sins in the foundations. Tuppence watched carefully as Marion reached for her cup. Ink stains dotted her fingertips, a peculiar shade of blue. Tuppence's pulse quickened. The same ink that stained the broken fountain pen. The same ink that marked Clara's cuff. The same ink that Edith used for her final letters. How often, Tuppence asked casually, did Edith write letters during your time with her? Marion blinked, unprepared for the shift. Often. She had a fondness for correspondence. And did you help her write them? Occasionally, Marion said. She sometimes dictated when she grew tired. Tuppence leaned in. Did you ever tear any of her letters? Or burn any? Marion's cup stopped halfway to her lips. Terror flashed momentarily in her eyes. No, never, I swear it. But her ink-stained fingers trembled. Before Tuppence could press further, Marion rose abruptly. I'm sorry, I must go. I only wanted to say she was frightened, but she was not wrong. She left quickly, almost fleeing the room. Tommy crossed his arms. Ink-stained liar or ink-stained witness? Neither, Tuppence murmured. She is ink-stained participant. Later that afternoon, while Tuppence reviewed their findings in the hotel sitting room, Tommy slipped off to see Reeves. He found the caretaker in an unused service hallway, polishing a set of silver frames with anxious vigor. Reeves, Tommy said quietly, there's something you haven't told us. Reeves flinched, nearly dropping the frame. Sir, I've said all I know. Tommy shook his head. You once heard Edith arguing with someone in the drawing room before her death. Reeves's face drained of colour. Who told you that? Does it matter? Tommy asked gently. We need to know. Reeves clutched the silver frame like a shield. It was late, nearly midnight, a week before Miss Edith passed. I was passing the drawing room and heard voices. Her voice, sharp, frightened, and another, low, insistent. Male or female? Tommy asked. Reeves hesitated. I couldn't say, but I heard her say you wouldn't dare, and the other voice replied, I already have. Tommy's jaw tightened. And you never saw who it was? Reeves shook his head miserably. The door was locked, and when I returned later, Edith insisted no one had visited. And you believed her? Tommy asked. Reeves swallowed. I feared to disbelieve her. Tommy studied him. Reeves, did you ever see Edith handling old documents? Something beyond letters? Reeves hesitated. Then very slowly he nodded. She once carried a parchment, thick, old. She asked for a place to hide it. I suggested the attic, but she said someone already knew about that place. She seemed cornered. Tommy thanked him and returned upstairs. Tuppence listened in silence as he relayed Reeves's confession. When he finished, she drew several pages together and tapped them rhythmically. Tommy, she said softly, we have been asking the wrong question. Oh, he said, and what is the right one? Not who had a motive, Tuppence replied, but who had the opportunity. Opportunity for what? He asked. To alter Edith's letters, she said, to tear them, to burn them, to hide pieces in the ventilation shaft, to steal the sealed envelope, to search the orchard shed, to drop the cufflink, intentionally or otherwise. Tommy blinked. You think it's all the work of one person? No, Tuppence said firmly. I think multiple people are hiding separate things, but one person manipulated Edith's correspondence. One person had consistent access. Tommy leaned back, absorbing this. Clara? She is too afraid of what we'll find, Tuppence said, but she has not tried to mislead us. Her emotions are genuine. Leonard? He fears the house is past, but he has not lifted a pen in years. His cufflink may not even be from last night. Marion? Tuppence paused. Marion has ink-stained fingers. She lived with Edith. She knew her routines. She shared her emotional confidences. Tommy tilted his head. But Marion is gentle. Tuppence met his eyes. Gentleness is not immunity to guilt. He frowned. Then Reeves? Reeves, she said slowly, is the only one who moves freely through every room. He knows the shadows. He hears the secrets. And he told you he heard an argument, yet said nothing. Tommy rubbed his temples. So which is it? Marion manipulating Edith's letters or Reeves covering for someone? Both, Tuppence whispered. Or neither. We cannot yet know. But the key question has changed. She rose and paced slowly. Who had the opportunity, she repeated, to access Edith's desk, her letters, and the ventilation shaft? Who stayed in the house day and night? Who could slip into rooms without raising suspicion? Who had reason to fear the testimonial? Tommy exhaled. You're thinking someone who lived here their entire lives. Tuppence nodded. Someone woven into the walls of Hollow Lodge. She stopped at the window, watching the estate's silhouette in the distance. The attic, she murmured. The desk, the grate, the shaft. Someone has been using this house long before Edith's final weeks. She turned back to Tommy, her voice steady and chilling. And until we answer which of them could alter letters without question, we will not uncover Edith's real enemy. Tommy had barely closed the sitting room door behind him when a frantic knocking rattled it again, sharp, rapid, almost frantic. Tuppence looked up from the armchair where she had been sorting Edith's fragmented letters. That, she said dryly, is either a murderer or someone desperate for tea. Tommy opened the door. Clara Langley stood on the threshold, pale, breathless and trembling as though she had run the entire way from Hollow Lodge. Her hat was crooked, her gloves mismatched, and her eyes held the wild shine of a woman trying to outrun a memory. Please, Clara whispered. I need to talk to you. Tuppence rose immediately. Come in. Sit. You look unwell. Clara stumbled into the room and collapsed onto the nearest chair. Her breath came in sharp, uneven bursts, and she pressed a hand against her chest as though steadying her own heartbeat. I've been wrong, she said, terribly wrong, and if I don't speak now, I may never forgive myself. Tuppence exchanged a quick glance with Tommy. Start from the beginning, she said gently. We'll follow. Clara nodded shakily. It was the night before Aunt Edith died. She clasped her gloved hands together tightly, as if to prevent them shaking. I went to Hollow Lodge to ask her, beg her, really, for a loan. The estate finances have been thinner than I made you believe. I thought perhaps she'd reconsider. When I arrived, I saw light under the drawing-room door. Tuppence leaned slightly closer, her interest sharpened. And? Clara swallowed. Aunt Edith was burning papers. She drew a shaky breath. She had the fire blazing high, and she was feeding documents into it one after another. I asked what she was doing. She only said, "Some things must not fall into the wrong hands." I thought she meant financial papers, debts, legal notices, something shameful but explainable. Tommy frowned. What kind of papers were they? I couldn't see clearly, Clara whispered, but she was crying. Aunt Edith never cried. Tuppence stilled. Edith, composed and self-contained, breaking down before her own niece. That alone suggested unbearable pressure. Clara continued. She made me swear I hadn't spoken to anyone, and then she said something strange, something I ignored until now. Tommy sat forward. What? Clara's voice cracked. She said, I must finish the last letter before they silence me. The room fell into a heavy, electric silence. Tuppence's breath caught. She said, silence me? Clara nodded miserably. I thought she was being dramatic about the solicitors. She was always at odds with them. I thought she meant they'd refuse some clause she wanted. But now... She broke off, tears welling. Now I realize she meant it literally. Tuppence's voice softened. Clara, you didn't know. But I helped, Clara whispered. I helped burn her letters. I destroyed evidence. She pressed trembling fingers to her temples. I may have helped them kill her. Tommy stood quickly. No, whoever threatened Edith knew what they were doing long before you arrived. Clara's tears fell freely. I went back days later, after you two came. I followed you into the orchard shed, not to frighten you, I swear. I thought something of Aunt Edith's might be hidden there. She told me once, years ago, that secrets die quietly in the orchard. Tuppence blinked. You were the footsteps we heard? Clara flushed. Yes, I panicked when I saw your torchlight. I ran. Well, Tommy said wryly, that certainly clears one mystery. But Tuppence wasn't smiling. She studied Clara's face with the same intensity she reserved for crucial witness statements. Clara, she said softly, there's more. Something else you've been holding back. Clara's breath hitched. There is, and it's the worst part. She twisted her gloves nervously. I saw someone enter Hollow Lodge the night before Aunt Edith died, she whispered. Someone who didn't belong there. Tuppence's pulse quickened, not with surprise, but with the confirmation of a fear she had held quietly. Who? She asked. Marion, Clara said. Marion Elwood. She covered her mouth with trembling fingers, as though speaking the name aloud shattered a fragile barrier she had held up for days. Tuppence sat down slowly, the revelation settling in her mind like a stone dropped into deep water. Marion, gentle, watchful Marion, creeping into the house at night, the same Marion whose fingers bore blue ink stains, the same Marion who claimed ignorance while offering fragments of Edith's fears. Tommy exhaled. And you're certain? Yes, Clara whispered. I recognized her coat. She slipped in through the side door. I assumed she and Aunt Edith were meeting secretly, perhaps to discuss the will. She shook her head. Now I don't know what to believe. Tuppence asked gently, Why didn't you tell us this before? Because Marion frightens me, Clara admitted quietly. Not physically. She's gentle, but she watches everything. She knows how to make people doubt themselves, and Aunt Edith trusted her more than anyone. Tuppence nodded. Thank you, Clara. This helps more than you know. Clara rose uncertainly. Will you tell me the truth when you find it? Tuppence touched her hand. If you want it. Clara nodded once, then left the room silently, the door closing behind her like a farewell. Tommy sighed heavily. Another revelation. Another suspect moving into the centre. Tuppence didn't reply at once. She stared at the charred remains in the hearth again. Tommy, she said finally, Clara's confession clarifies one thing. Edith knew she was in danger. She was preparing her final letter, and someone destroyed it. And Marion was there the night before she died, Tommy said grimly. That's damning. Possibly. Or someone wearing Marion's coat. Or someone Clara assumed was Marion in dim light. Tommy raised a brow. You don't believe it was her? I believe, Tuppence said slowly, that we must verify everything before we accuse anyone. For now, Marion's presence is a clue, not a verdict. She stood. Come. There is something in Edith's bedroom we haven't searched thoroughly. Edith's room smelled faintly of lavender sachets and carefully closed emotions. The bed was neatly made, the writing desk still waiting for hands that would never return to it. But Tuppence crossed not to the desk, but to the fireplace. Edith hid clues in the ventilation shaft, she murmured, bending by the mantel. Why not here? Tommy knelt beside her. Another grate, another panel. Tuppence pressed along the mantel's underside, testing for irregularities. On the third pass, her fingers brushed a slight indentation, not visible but tactile. She pressed it. A small section of the mantel clicked and loosened. Tommy stared. You're uncanny. Practice, she said modestly, and a healthy suspicion of Victorian carpentry. She slid the panel open. Inside was a narrow recess, a small hiding place just large enough for a folded strip of paper. Tuppence plucked it out carefully. It was stained at the edges with blue, dark blue, unmistakable against the cream paper. And the handwriting. Tommy recognized it instantly. Marion, he said. Tuppence unfolded the strip. There were only 6 words, but they struck like a blow. I must do it tonight. M. Tommy exhaled. Well, that seems fairly clear. Tuppence didn't answer. She studied the ink's edges, the slant of the writing, the pressure marks beneath it. Something is wrong, she murmured. Tommy blinked. Wrong? Tuppence, that reads like a confession. A confession, Tuppence agreed, or a very convenient imitation. She held the paper closer to the light. The strokes are correct, she said, but the pressure is different. Marion writes with a soft hand. This, she pointed, is firmer. Someone forced her style. Tommy stared. Meaning someone forged Marion's handwriting. Possibly, Tuppence said, or Marion wrote it under duress. Either way, this was meant to incriminate her. She folded the paper again, her mind already racing. Tommy, she said quietly, we are dealing with someone clever, someone who manipulates letters, burns evidence, hides things in shafts, and stages scenes to cast suspicion elsewhere. Tommy's jaw tightened. Reeves? Maybe, but Reeves lacks subtlety. She paced slowly across the room. The person we're hunting understands psychology, understands Edith's habits, understands how each suspect behaves. And? Tommy asked. And, Tuppence said softly, they are not finished. She turned toward the door. We must speak to Marion, she added. Not confront her, observe her, watch her reactions, and uncover how deeply she was entangled in Edith's final days. Tommy pocketed the strip of paper. And what about Clara? Clara fears the past, Tuppence said, but she is not its architect. And Leonard? Leonard fears disgrace, but he is too proud to crawl through attics or burn letters in secret. Tommy nodded slowly. So our strongest suspect remains Marion, Tuppence finished, but only because someone wants her to be. The fire crackled faintly behind them, stirring the ashes of Edith's last attempts at truth. And somewhere in Hollow Lodge, the final letter still waited, unfinished, silenced, but not lost. Not yet. The strip of paper lay between them on the small hotel table, illuminated by the narrow beam of an afternoon sunbeam that slipped through the curtains like an uninvited observer. Tuppence read it again, lips tightening each time her eyes traced the familiar blue ink. Edith, you are right. I cannot protect him any longer. Leonard's secret will destroy us all. Monsieur Tommy exhaled. So Marion admits complicity, or at least knowledge. Tuppence didn't answer immediately. She ran her fingertips over the paper, gently, thoughtfully, as if feeling for meaning in the pressure of each stroke. This isn't a confession of murder, she said at last. It's a confession of silence. She knew something Edith discovered, something about Leonard. Leonard's secret, Tommy repeated, which likely ties to Rose Hales. Exactly, Tuppence said. This letter is the top half of another message. The bottom might be the one we recovered from the shaft. Edith may have intended to join them, or she hid each half separately to protect them. Tommy adjusted his tie. Shall we confront Leonard, then, before he flees to the continent or collapses into a melodramatic heap? Tuppence smirked faintly. Let's hope for the latter. It tends to be more informative. Leonard Langley answered the door to his sitting room with an air of forced dignity, though his eyes looked as though he had not slept in a week. His suit was immaculate, but his collar sat askew, betraying trembling hands. "I suppose," Leonard said weakly, "this is about Edith." Tuppence held out the paper silently. Leonard read it. Colour drained from his face as though someone had opened a valve. "Oh," he whispered. "Oh, God." "Marion wrote it," Tuppence said. "Did Edith confront you before her death?" Leonard's throat bobbed. He stumbled backward into an armchair, gripping its arms as though they were the last things anchoring him to the earth. "Yes," he said quietly. "She confronted me about Rose." Tuppence settled opposite him, expression calm. "Tell us." Leonard hesitated, then spoke in a rushed, pained whisper. Rose Hales was a housemaid, young, bright, full of admiration for everything, including me. His voice wavered in shame. "One evening she found me in the Old West corridor, upset after an argument with Edith. She tried to comfort me. I misunderstood her sympathy." Tommy's eyebrows rose. Leonard winced. "No, not that. I mean, I thought she was accusing me of something. I was angry, overwrought. I grabbed her arm. She pulled away, stepped back, lost her balance." His breath hitched. "She fell, down the staircase, broke her neck." He covered his face. "It was an accident," he whispered. "A tragic accident. But I panicked. I was young, foolish, terrified. Edith found me. She protected me. She said the family couldn't endure another scandal." Tuppence remained silent, allowing the truth to settle. "Edith hid the testimonial," Leonard continued. "She buried everything, but after she found it again, after all these years, she changed. She wanted to confess. She said protecting the past had only poisoned our present." "And did you confront her?" Tommy asked. "No," Leonard said vehemently. "Never. I feared she'd reveal everything, yes, but I would never harm her. She was the only person who ever tried to save me." Tuppence leaned forward. "Leonard, did Marion know the truth?" "She suspected." He swallowed. "Edith confided too much in her. Marion loved my sister. If Edith had asked her to die for her, she would have. But Marion's devotion blinded her. She tried to shield me from the consequences." Tuppence nodded thoughtfully. "So Marion protected you, and Edith protected you, and you protected no one." Leonard flinched at the accuracy. "Yes." Tommy stood. "Your guilt for the past is noted, Mr. Langley, but it isn't our primary pursuit. We're trying to determine who killed Edith." Leonard looked up sharply. "Not Marion. She might lie, forge, hide things, but she would never kill." Tuppence exchanged a look with Tommy. "We'll see." They left Leonard in his guilt-soaked solitude. Reeves was polishing the drawing-room banister when they returned to Hollow Lodge. His movements were slow, deliberate, as though each stroke was meant to erase a memory rather than dust. "Reeves," Tommy said calmly, "you've been withholding something." Reeves stiffened. "Sir, I've told you all I know." "Really?" Tuppence asked softly. "Did you mention the tea?" Reeves's hand froze mid-polish. "The tea," he echoed faintly. "Edith's tea caddy," Tuppence said. "Tell us about it." Reeves's eyes darted between them. His throat moved in a dry swallow. I don't know." "Reeves," Tuppence said gently, "lying doesn't suit you." The caretaker sagged. "The morning Miss Edith died," he whispered, "the tea caddy was empty, every leaf gone. She drank tea daily, yes, but never so much as to empty it overnight." Tommy frowned. "Who prepared her tea that morning?" Reeves hesitated, then reluctantly, "Marion. Miss Marion always prepared Miss Edith's tea if I was out on errands." Tuppence's eyes sharpened. "So Marion had access, opportunity." "Yes," Reeves whispered, "but I don't believe she poisoned her. Miss Marion loved her." Tuppence studied him. "And how did Edith die, Reeves? Not of a heart condition, she had none. Not of frailty. Her doctor said she was steady. So what killed her?" Reeves looked like a man shrinking under invisible weight. "Poison, most likely. Something placed in her tea, but I did not say anything because—" his voice wavered, "because I feared suspicion would fall on me." Tuppence tilted her head. "Why would it?" Reeves's silence was telling. Tommy took a step forward. "Reeves, Were you the last person to see Edith alive? The caretaker's breath faltered. I brought her the Morning Post. She asked me to leave it on the table. She looked troubled, that was all. And did Marion enter after that? I believe so. Tuppence studied him closely, but Reeves would say no more. Marion met them in Edith's old morning room. She sat by the window, hands folded neatly, posture straight. But Tuppence sensed tension beneath the serenity, like thread pulled taut. "Marion," Tuppence said gently, "we found something of yours." She handed over the folded strip with its damning ink. Marion's face blanched. "Where did you—" "In Edith's mantle," Tuppence answered. "Hidden, preserved, waiting." Marion read the words. Her hands trembled. "Yes," she whispered. "I wrote it." "Why?" Tommy asked. "Because Edith discovered the truth about Leonard, and she intended to reveal it." Marion closed her eyes. "I begged her not to. It would destroy him, destroy the family. She said justice mattered more." "So you tore her letters," Tuppence said softly. "Altered them, hid them." Marion nodded miserably. "I couldn't let her ruin Leonard. He suffers enough." "And Edith?" Tuppence asked. "Did she deserve your interference?" Marion sobbed. "I only wanted to protect her. I never meant for any of this to happen." Tommy's voice hardened. "And did you poison Edith?" Marion's head snapped up. "No, never. I prepared her tea, but I swear it was clean. I only removed some letters. I only tried to manage her fear." Tuppence watched her closely. The agony seemed real. Marion was many things, prone to secrecy, fiercely loyal, emotionally fragile, but not a murderer. "And the night before Edith died?" Tuppence asked quietly. "Where were you?" Marion's lips parted. "At the lodge. Yes, but not to harm her. She asked me to come. She said she needed to finish her letter and that she wanted someone she trusted nearby." Tuppence absorbed this. The timeline had shifted again, clarified, sharpened. "Marion," she said gently, "did you know Edith suspected someone else in the house?" Marion shook her head. "She would not tell me names, only that she feared the Watcher, her word." Tuppence paused. "Watcher?" "Yes," Marion whispered. "Someone who knew her movements, someone who had access to every room." Tuppence and Tommy exchanged a loaded look. Reeves, the letters, the keys, the midnight arguments overheard, his constant presence, his selective silence. Tuppence felt the final pieces sliding into place. "Marion," she said softly, "we believe you, but Edith's murderer is still here, and your safety may depend on what you tell us next." Before Marion could respond, the front bell rang, loud, insistent. Reeves's footsteps sounded in the corridor, but then, nothing. Silence, followed by, "He's gone." Tommy hurried into the hallway. Reeves's coat was missing, his cap gone. The back door stood ajar, swinging slightly in the breeze. "He's vanished," Tommy said grimly. Tuppence stepped into the doorway, eyes narrowing. "No," she murmured, "he hasn't vanished. He's running." She turned to Tommy, voice steady as iron. "And we must catch him before Edith's last letter disappears forever." The discovery came not with a scream or a crash, but with a faint metallic click behind the panelling, a sound so small Tommy would have missed it entirely if Tuppence hadn't raised a warning hand. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Tommy nodded slowly. Behind the wall. They stood in Edith's upstairs corridor, the same hallway where Tuppence had earlier examined the ventilation shaft. Only now, the atmosphere had shifted, tightened, thickened, as though the house itself were holding its breath. Tuppence crossed the floor in 3 quiet steps and pressed her ear to the wainscoting. Another click, then the subtle rasp of bare feet against floorboards. "Tuppence," Tommy murmured. "Someone is living inside the walls." "Not someone," she corrected softly. "Reeves." Tommy paled. "Good Lord." She nodded, lips tightening. "He knows the crawl spaces, the old servant passages, the forgotten corners. Edith once said Hollow Lodge was a house with too many lungs. Reeves has been breathing through all of them." Before Tommy could respond, footsteps pattered away within the wall, swift and directionless, like a trapped animal darting for cover. Tuppence straightened. "He's running." "And we're following," Tommy said, already moving. They began their search on the ground floor, pushing open doors Reeves normally avoided, disused parlours, rooms wallpapered decades ago and never updated, closets that smelled of camphor and dust. With each threshold, the truth became more evident. Reeves had been inhabiting Hollow Lodge in ways no one else had imagined. A cot lay tucked behind old drapery in the west sitting room. A candle stub rested beside it, melted into a saucer. Crumbs marked the floor near a stack of newspapers, recent newspapers, stolen from the front hall before Clara ever saw them. Tuppence lifted a page. He was reading about Edith's estate, she murmured, studying the inheritance, watching. Tommy knelt by the cot. There are footprints here, fresh ones. And scuff marks, Tuppence said, from dragging something heavy. Or someone, Tommy suggested, but she shook her head. No, something, likely papers or boxes. They checked the abandoned laundry room next, where lint gathered in drifts like tiny grey dunes. Another hiding place had been fashioned here, a patched blanket, a chipped mug, a half-eaten apple core. He's been squatting inside this house for weeks, perhaps months, Tuppence said softly. Edith must have known, or suspected. Tommy's voice dropped. Did she confront him? Tuppence's eyes darkened. Reeves said he overheard an argument, but what if he was the one arguing with her? Before they could continue, a sudden thud echoed from the floor above, the unmistakable sound of something heavy being moved. Tommy stiffened. The attic. Tuppence nodded grimly. Of course. That's where he'd retreat. And that's where he thinks Edith hid the last fragment. Together they hurried up the main staircase, steps muffled by thick carpeting. As they reached the landing, a cold draught slipped from the attic stairwell. Tuppence placed her hand on the doorknob. It moved, from the other side. She exchanged one brief look with Tommy, steadying, wordless. Then she wrenched the door open. The attic greeted them with its familiar dimness, tall rafters dense with shadows, the smell of dust and old wood thick in the air. Boxes lay in uneven stacks, some disturbed, some newly shifted. A lantern swung from a nail beam, its flame weak but persistent. And Reeves stood near the far wall. He looked thinner than before, almost ghost-like, his face streaked with soot, his coat torn at the sleeve. His eyes, brown, tired, frantic, gleamed with animal desperation. Please, Reeves said hoarsely. Please, don't come any closer. Tuppence held her posture steady. Reeves, running makes you look guilty. I am guilty, he cried, but not in the ways you think. Tommy stepped forward, calm but firm. Then tell us the truth. Reeves laughed, a broken, hollow sound. Truth. Edith couldn't bear the truth. Not about the family, not about her brother, not about herself. He backed toward the ventilation shaft's upper access point, where they had found the first envelope days earlier. It was all meant to stay hidden, Reeves hissed, but she got sentimental, thought time had changed things, thought justice mattered again. Tuppence's eyes sharpened. You blackmailed her. Reeves froze. Tommy frowned. Tuppence? Yes, she continued. You found the testimonial. You knew what Leonard did to Rose Hales, and you used it. You controlled Edith with it. Reeves's jaw tensed. She owed me. I protected this house. I kept its secrets. Do you know what it's like to serve a family for 40 years and be treated as part of the furniture? Tuppence said nothing. He blinked rapidly, voice cracking. I only asked for what was fair. A little money, a little gratitude. But Edith, she refused. She said she would reveal everything to the solicitors. And so, Tuppence said softly, you killed her. Reeves shut his eyes. She forced me, he whispered. Tommy's voice was quiet but iron. No one forced you to poison her tea. Reeves trembled. She wouldn't listen. She said the family deserved punishment. She said the truth mattered more than any of us. I begged her. I told her it would ruin everything. But she wouldn't stop. She said she had already begun writing her final letter. He opened his eyes again, glassy, frantic. So I did the only thing I could. I took the tea caddy, mixed the powder, watched her drink it. Tuppence felt cold but not surprised. And then you tore her letters, she said. Burned them. Hid what you couldn't destroy. Reeves nodded. I had to. If the law found the testimonial, if Leonard's guilt resurfaced, Clara would lose everything. The estate would crumble, and me, I would be cast aside, left with nothing. Tommy shook his head in disgust. So you protected yourself by killing the one person who trusted you. Reeves's expression twisted. She stopped trusting me long ago. She saw me as a threat. She said I'd become a shadow. You have, Tuppence said quietly. Reeves stiffened. No, I saved this family. I removed the rot. You murdered Edith, Tuppence said bluntly, and for the first time, Reeves didn't deny it. What happened next unfolded in a heartbeat. Reeves lunged toward them, not with a weapon, but with a wild attempt to reach the attic stairwell hatch behind them. His intent was clear: trap them inside. Tommy reacted instantly, stepping in front of Tuppence and throwing his weight against Reeves. The caretaker stumbled, crashing into a stack of boxes. Wooden lids clattered to the floor, echoing like falling beams. "Run!" Tuppence shouted, but Reeves was already scrambling up, grabbing a loose board like a makeshift club. Tommy dodged a swing. The board smacked into a trunk, sending dust clouds exploding into the air. Tuppence darted toward the side hatch near the rafters, a small maintenance ladder leading down toward an older storage room. Reeves saw her too late. "No," he roared. Tommy blocked him again, shoving him backward. The momentum sent Reeves sprawling into another pile of crates, which collapsed over him in a noisy avalanche, temporarily pinning him beneath them. Tuppence descended the ladder 2 steps at a time, calling out for help as soon as she reached the lower corridor. "Police!" she shouted. "Someone call the police!" A voice answered from the main staircase. Clara's voice, frightened but determined. "I already did. I saw Reeves running and I feared the worst." Within minutes, uniformed officers swarmed upstairs. Reeves was dragged from beneath the collapsed boxes, coughing and thrashing. "You fools!" he screamed. "You don't understand. Edith was going to betray us all. She wanted the truth to come out." Tuppence stepped aside, watching as Reeves was handcuffed. "No," she said softly. "Edith wanted justice, not revenge." Reeves glared at her bitterly. "She should have let the past die." "And instead," Tuppence replied, "you ensured it would never rest." He was taken away down the stairs, shouting incoherently about loyalty, shadows, and debts long unpaid. The attic fell silent, except for the faint rustle of remaining dust drifting through the stillness. Tommy crouched beside the fallen crates, shifting them aside. Something white fluttered beneath the cot Reeves had placed there. "Tuppence," he called, "there's more." She approached, lifting the edge of a grimy mattress. Beneath it lay a folded paper, its edges pressed flat by months or years of weight. She unfolded it. Edith's handwriting flowed across the page in a trembling but resolute script. "Let the right ones be free. Only the one who profits from shadows is my enemy." Tommy exhaled. She knew Reeves was the real threat. Tuppence nodded slowly. She left this for someone to find, someone who would look everywhere, even where shadows sleep. Tommy smiled faintly. "Meaning us." "Meaning anyone willing to seek truth above comfort," Tuppence said. She folded the paper carefully, reverently. "Edith tried to protect the innocent," she murmured, "even at the cost of her own life." Tommy placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "And now the truth is free. Reeves will face justice." Tuppence looked around the attic, the rafters, the dust, the forgotten relics of a family's long-buried sins. "Hollow Lodge," she said quietly, "can finally breathe honestly." And for the first time since they arrived, the house felt still, not with menace but with release. The morning found Hollow Lodge as still as a page that had finally turned. No sharp silences, no hurried footsteps, no whispers tucked behind doors. Instead, the house possessed a quiet that felt earned, a breathing out after years spent holding in secrets like stale air. Tommy and Tuppence stood in the entrance hall, neither speaking yet. They were waiting, in a sense, for the house to acknowledge what had been uncovered. It was Leonard who approached first. He looked older than he had even the day before, as though truths once spoken had weight the body must learn to carry. His hands trembled slightly, whether from regret or release Tuppence couldn't tell. "I've arranged for a memorial," Leonard said, his gaze not quite meeting theirs, "for Rose Hales. A proper one. I can't undo what happened, but at least her name won't be hidden anymore." Tuppence inclined her head. "It's the right thing." Leonard nodded, the gesture small, almost timid. "Edith shielded me for too long. I dare say she shouldn't have. I depended upon her silence until it became convenient. Shame passed across his face like cloud shadow. But you've given us the chance to set it right. All of it. He walked away then, shoulders bowed but lighter than before. A man stepping into responsibility, however, belatedly. Marian Elwood appeared next, composed but strangely fragile. She stood at the base of the staircase, clutching a modest carpet bag. Her clothing today was subdued, no eccentric cufflinks, no splash of flamboyant colour. Even her manner had softened, as if the house itself had pressed upon her the need for gentleness. "I'm leaving," she announced. "Abroad, perhaps, somewhere quiet. I cannot stay here. Too many memories, too many lies." She paused. "I cared for Edith, you know, truly. When she told me she intended to reveal everything, I feared what might happen. I tried to protect Leonard, foolishly, and in doing so, I betrayed her trust." Tuppence stepped closer. "Edith knew your heart. She wouldn't have wanted you punished for trying to help the wrong person." Marian gave a small, broken smile. "I hope you're right. Goodbye, Mrs. Beresford. Mr. Beresford." She departed without ceremony, the front door closing behind her with a soft click that seemed, oddly, respectful. Clara Langley arrived last. For the first time since they'd met, she looked at ease, not carefree, but released from a tightening noose. She held a sheaf of documents in one arm, the amended will that Reeves had tried so hard to bury. "It's extraordinary," Clara said, breathless. "Edith, she left me everything. Not money, well, a bit of that, but responsibility. The lodge, the grounds, enough funds to repair what needs repairing. I thought she mistrusted me, or pitied me. I never imagined she was preparing me for this." Tuppence smiled warmly. "Edith saw strength in you, far more than you realized." Clara blinked rapidly. "And I saw nothing at all. I was too busy being resentful, thinking she held everything back from me." She looked around the hall. But she wasn't holding back. She was hiding the worst parts until she could make them right. "Thank you, both of you, for helping that along." She squeezed Tuppence's hand, then Tommy's, before retreating upstairs to begin the unfamiliar task of reclaiming the rooms as her own. When she was gone, Tommy exhaled. A house filled with secrets makes for an exhausting week. "Secrets are rarely restful," Tuppence replied, "but sometimes they're necessary stepping stones before truth can walk in." They wandered through the lodge one final time, not as intruders now, nor investigators, simply as witnesses to a place that had weathered the burdens of those who lived within its walls. The drawing-room awaited them with an open warmth. Sunlight fell in slender beams across the floor, touching the edges of shelves and armchairs and the writing desk, as though stitching the room together anew. Tuppence approached the desk with deliberate steps. Its drawers were open now, innocent in their emptiness. She touched the smooth inner ledge and felt the faintest indentation, a whisper of where Edith's hand had rested countless times. "I keep thinking of her," Tuppence murmured, "sitting here, drafting and redrafting those fragments. She must have known she couldn't finish the letter all at once. She hid it like puzzle pieces, trusting someone would eventually assemble them." Tommy leaned against the mantel. "Smart, really, and brave. Edith could have destroyed everything and left the family in ignorance." "She didn't want ignorance," Tuppence said softly. "She wanted justice, but of the right kind. She wanted those who were innocent to be spared, and those who profited from shadows to be revealed." Tommy smiled faintly. "Sounds like someone I know." She ignored the compliment, but didn't quite hide her pleased expression. A memory returned to her then. The sharp, unexpected crack of a teacup in her own sitting room, the hairline fracture blossoming across porcelain like a warning. She reached into her handbag and withdrew the broken fragment she had kept since that morning. Turning it in her fingers, she felt its message more clearly than ever. "Edith began this with a crack," Tuppence said, "a small break in the surface, but it widened until the truth shone through." She placed the fragment gently inside an empty compartment of the writing desk, a symbolic completion of Edith's final chapter, a secret no longer needed to hide. As they left the drawing room, Tommy paused at the ventilation grate near the fireplace. He frowned. "You know, I never want to see another ventilation shaft again." Tuppence laughed. "Nonsense. You enjoy a good crawl through confined spaces." "I absolutely do not. You enjoy it far more than you enjoy my shortcuts." That, Tommy said dryly, is impossible. Their banter echoed lightly along the corridor, harmless and human, a counterpoint to the gravity that had filled the house only days before. They made their way out into the entrance hall where the air felt lighter, as though Hollow Lodge itself had unclenched. Outside, the garden stretched in peaceful rows. The orchard beyond swayed gently, no longer ominous, but simply itself again. Tommy slipped his arm through Tuppence's. Ready to leave this charming establishment? Quite, though part of me will miss its mysteries. Only part? She tilted her head. Let's say I prefer mysteries that don't involve nearly falling through attic beams. Or being trapped in stairwells by homicidal caretakers, Tommy added. There is that. They stepped outside, the gravel crunched beneath their shoes, a pleasant, ordinary sound. The car waited at the end of the drive, familiar and grounding. As they approached it, Tuppence looked back once more. Hollow Lodge stood poised and serene, not proud, not brooding, simply free. A place that no longer strained under the weight of unspoken sins. Do you think Edith would be satisfied? Tommy asked. Tuppence considered. I think she hoped the right people would hear her. And we did. That's enough. Tommy opened the car door for her. Then let's go home. And promise me something. What? No more cases involving ventilation shafts. Tuppence laughed again, settling into her seat. Very well, but houses do breathe secrets, Tommy. He slid behind the wheel. Only when someone listens. Precisely. With that, the engine hummed to life, and they rolled down the lane, leaving Hollow Lodge behind, lighter, calmer, and finally released from the shadows in its walls.